I'll tell you a story the way it really happened to me, or at least the way it still feels in my bones every time I think back on it. You know how some folks will test you just to see how far they can push before you break? Well, I found myself right in the middle of one of those fights, and it started with something as simple as a car parked where it didn't belong. One Tuesday morning, I walked out onto my porch, coffee in hand, and there it was, a spotless white SUV sitting sideways across my driveway, blocking me in like a wall of arrogance. I knew the owner, of course. Everyone did. Marlene, president of the Lakeside Homeowners Association. She'd been hounding me for months about selling a strip of my pasture so she could push through a road for the new subdivision. I'd ignored the letters, laughed off the threats, but that day she left a note tucked under the wiper that said, "Don't go anywhere. We need to discuss community access. I'll be back at noon." The nerve of it made my jaw tighten. Now, I'm not a man who looks for trouble. I was raised on this land, raised to work hard and keep my head down, and most days that's enough for me. But if you park across my driveway and tell me I can't leave my own property, well, that dog don't hunt. I stared at her shiny SUV gleaming in the sun like a dentist's smile, and then I thought about what was sitting in my barn, 30,000 pounds of green steel that didn't mind a bit of heavy lifting. My wife, Mary, was on the porch sipping her coffee, and she didn't even try to stop me. She just raised an eyebrow and asked, "The camera in the birdhouse working?" When I nodded, she smirked, "Then go ahead." So I fired up the tractor, eased it out of the barn, and rolled it right up to her SUV. Neighbors started gathering like it was a front porch matinee. I slid the forks under her front axle, lifted that luxury car clear off the gravel like it was a toy, and carried it slow and steady to the roadside ditch. I lowered it down gentle. No scratches, no dents, just a soft thud into the mud, nose down, tail in the air like a pig rooting for truffles. The neighborhood was dead silent for a beat, then someone whistled low. A few hours later the clip was online, Farmer versus HOA Queen, and by supper it had gone viral. Folks all over were cheering me on, calling the tractor a justice delivery system. For a moment, I felt 10 feet tall. But here's the thing about humiliating someone who's used to power. They don't forgive, they don't forget, they just regroup. 2 days later, I got my first certified letter. Fines stacked one on top of another. $500 for operating heavy machinery on a residential road. Another grand for landscape damage, where her SUV had slid into the ditch, and $2,000 more for public nuisance, with the viral video cited as proof. My own driveway, my own barn, suddenly labeled a safety hazard. I laughed at the absurdity until Mary read the fine print. Our HOA bylaws were written so vaguely, Marlene could twist them any way she wanted. And then it got darker. One night, I found my diesel tank drained, padlock cut clean through, 500 gallons gone. A day later, my cattle fence had been sliced open, and half my herd scattered toward the highway at dawn. By the time I rounded them up, I was caked in mud and fury. This wasn't a neighborly spat anymore. This was sabotage, plain and simple. She wanted me to break, to look careless, to feed her story that my farm was a hazard and needed to be carved up for community good. That night at the kitchen table, Mary laid out county maps, HOA filings, and a plan. If Marlene wanted war, we'd fight it with proof. We set up hidden birdhouse cameras, GPS trackers, and I rigged one small fuel drum with invisible UV dye, the kind that glows bright blue under the right light. A few nights later, sure enough, a wiry man in cheap boots crept onto my property with a siphon hose. I watched him from the shadows as he stole what he thought was easy fuel. When I stepped out and lit him up with my flashlight, his hands were already glowing like ghost fire. I called it Smith Justice. He stammered, swore it wasn't his idea, that Marlene had paid him cash to make my life miserable. His confession opened the floodgates. Mary dug through county records until she uncovered forged HOA minutes, fake approvals for legal action, and a shell company tied to Marlene's maiden name. She wasn't just an HOA president drunk on power. She was the developer herself, trying to force an easement through my pasture for her own profit. But Marlene must have sensed the walls closing in, because on the night a storm ripped across the valley, she sent bigger men, 2 thugs with chains and a truck, intent on tearing down my gate and destroying the evidence. With phone lines down and no sheriff coming, I climbed back into my tractor. Rain lashing my face, thunder shaking the sky, I drove straight through my fence and met them head on. They tried to spin their truck away, but I herded them like stubborn cattle, slow and steady, until they panicked and slid nose first into my irrigation pond. When the sheriff arrived after the storm, he found them shivering, their truck half sunk, and me standing there with their burner phones sealed in a bag. We didn't stop there. At the next HOA meeting, Mary and I walked in with our neighbors packed shoulder to shoulder. She set her phone on the podium and live-streamed the whole thing. I laid it all out: Jerry's blue-handed theft, the fake minutes, the corporate filings. When I showed the documents tying her shell company to her maiden name, the crowd turned. Folks she'd bullied for years stood up and told their stories. The flower bed she'd fined, the swing set she'd threatened. Marlene's face drained of color as the sheriff walked in, warrant in hand, charging her with conspiracy, vandalism, fraud, even racketeering. She tried to run, dove into her shiny SUV, and in some twisted stroke of justice, slid right back into the exact same ditch I'd set her in weeks before. The board resigned in disgrace, the developer deal collapsed, and my pasture stayed mine. Life went back to chores and quiet evenings on the porch, though I kept one souvenir, a bent HOA sign I nailed up in the barn as a reminder. It catches the light some mornings, a crooked little badge that says plain as day: "We don't start trouble here, but if you bring it to our door, we'll finish it. With wits, with proof, and if we must, with 12 tons of green steel." Now I'll leave you with this. Was I right to fight fire with fire, or did I go too far when I dropped that SUV into the ditch and baited a thief with glowing fuel? Some say justice, some say reckless, and maybe the truth lies somewhere in between. I want to know what you think. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Tell me how you'd have handled a neighbor like that. And if you've ever had to stand your ground when someone tried to take what was yours, share your story. And if you think folks need to hear this, hit that like button, share it with a friend, and subscribe for more. Because out here, the stories are real, and sometimes justice comes with muddy boots and diesel on your hands.